I walked up to my son's house for a surprise Thanksgiving visit and saw one heartbreaking thing on the front porch. That single sight caused my son and his wife to lose their entire multi-million-dollar fortune in exactly 48 hours. What followed is a brutal story about what happens when you mistake a father's generosity for a fool's weakness. Before I reveal what I found outside that door, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and please subscribe if you believe that karma always collects its debt. My name is Isaiah Turner, and at 68 years old, I have learned that some feelings settle deep in your marrow long before your mind can make sense of them. Then Thanksgiving afternoon, it was a cold feeling, a deep, penetrating chill that had absolutely nothing to do with the rare 15-degree freeze gripping the streets of Atlanta. It started the moment I turned the key in the ignition of my rusted Ford pickup truck. I was driving to my son Darius's house in one of those new sprawling gated communities where every mansion looks identical, built so fast you wonder if they used hope instead of concrete. It was an unannounced visit. My gut told me to go, and a man who spent 45 years framing houses and laying foundations learns to trust his gut. It tells you when a beam is rotting from the inside out long before the roof collapses. And my family's foundation felt like it was about to crumble into dust. The drive was 40 minutes of silence, giving me too much time to think. The phone calls with Darius had changed over the last 2 years since he married Vanessa. They used to be easy full of talk about the Hawks game or the barbecue recipe he wanted to try. Now they were heavy with unspoken things. His casual check-ins had morphed into hesitant requests that always ended with a dollar sign, a number for the new property taxes, a number for the landscaping project Vanessa wanted, a number for a country club membership they could not afford but felt they deserved because of their new social circle. It was never just a father and son call anymore. It was a transaction. And Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, her voice was like polished glass, smooth and shiny but cold to the touch. In every conversation, she found a way to talk about my assets. She would say, "Isaiah, you really should downsize from that old place and think of the equity you are sitting on." She talked about my home of 40 years as if it were just a bank account waiting to be liquidated so they could upgrade their lifestyle. My late wife, Eleanor, saw it coming. She always did. "Isaiah," she would tell me, her hand warm on my rough palm, "that boy Darius has a heart of gold, but his spine is made of cotton. You have to be the oak tree because he will bend with any strong wind." Vanessa was a hurricane. Eleanor had worried that Darius would forget the sweat and sacrifice that built our life, that he would trade the solid ground of his upbringing for the shifting sands of appearances. As I turned onto their street, lined with manicured hedges and imported statues, I knew her worries had become my reality. This was not a holiday visit. This was a rescue mission, though I didn't know who I was saving yet. The house was lit up like a cruise ship in the night. I could see the golden light spilling from the dining room windows, silhouettes of people laughing, raising their expensive crystal glasses, the sounds of a happy, successful family echoing into the street. But my eyes were not drawn to the warmth. They were drawn to a small dark shadow huddled by the detached garage door, a shape that did not belong in the perfect picture. My heart seized in my chest. I slammed on the brakes, the old truck groaning in protest as it skidded on a patch of black ice. It was Malik, my 8-year-old grandson. He was sitting on the frozen concrete, hugging his knees to his chest. He was wearing nothing but a thin cotton t-shirt and a pair of gym shorts in 15-degree weather. I was out of the truck before it had fully stopped my body moving on pure cold fury. The wind cut through my heavy work jacket like a knife, and I could only imagine what it felt like on his bare skin. I ran to him. His legs were covered in goosebumps that looked painful. His lips had a terrifying bluish tint that made my stomach turn over. He was shaking a constant violent tremor he could not control. I ripped off my heavy canvas coat and wrapped it around him, pulling him into my arms. He felt as cold as a block of ice against my chest. "Malik," I shouted over the wind. "What in God's name happened, son? Why are you out here?" He looked up at me, his big brown eyes wide and full of tears that had frozen on his cheeks. I spilled the grape juice," he whispered, his teeth chattering so hard he could barely form the words. On Mom's new rug, the Persian one. The rage in my chest burned so hot it felt like it could melt steel. For a spill? for a stain on a piece of fabric they had put their 8-year-old child outside to freeze. They treated a rug with more respect than their own flesh and blood. I held him tight, feeling the smallness of his body, the desperate way he clung to me for warmth, buried in the smell of sawdust and old tobacco from my coat. The laughter from inside the house drifted out to us. It sounded like a mockery, a cruel joke played by people who had lost their souls. I looked from Malik's shivering form to the warm, bright house, and a switch flipped inside me. The time for being the quiet, supportive father was over. The time for the oak had come. I did not bother with the doorbell. With Malik still bundled in my coat and cradled in my arms like a baby, I walked up to the heavy mahogany door, the one I had written the check for 3 years ago, and I prepared to shatter their perfect world. I raised my heavy work boot and drove it into the wood right next to the handle. I didn't knock. I did not ask for entry. I breached the perimeter. The door flew open with a crack that sounded like a gunshot echoing off the high cathedral ceilings. The heavy oak slammed against the interior wall, vibrating the entire entryway. The noise silenced the house instantly. The polite jazz music seemed to vanish. The clinking of silver forks against fine china stopped. The laughter died in their throats. I stepped across the threshold, bringing the biting winter wind inside with me. My muddy boots left thick, dark streaks on the pristine marble floor, but I did not care. I walked straight into the dining room with Malik shivering against my chest. There they were. Darius and Vanessa sat at the heads of a long mahogany table that was groaning under the weight of a 20-pound turkey, glistening bowls of sides, and bottles of wine that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. They were entertaining 6 guests, people I vaguely recognized as the new friends Vanessa had curated since the wedding. Men in tailored suits and women with diamonds that caught the chandelier light. For a heartbeat, everyone just stared. Their faces were frozen in a tableau of shock. They looked at me, a large black man in dirty work clothes holding a terrified, half-naked child, standing in their Architectural Digest dining room. Vanessa was the first to recover. She stood up her chair, scraping harshly against the floor. She pasted a brittle fake smile onto her face, the kind that never reaches the eyes. "Isaiah," she chirped, her voice a high-pitched performance of surprised delight. "You came. We didn't think you were coming. You should have called. We would have had the caterers set another plate." She gestured vaguely at the overflowing table, trying to act as if this was normal, as if I had not just kicked in her front door. Darius just stood there. His face was a mask of guilt and terror. He could not even meet my eyes. He looked at his wine glass, at his manicured fingernails, anywhere but at his father and his son. I didn't speak to them. I walked past the stunned guests and went straight to the center of the room. I pulled out an empty chair, the velvet seat cover looking too delicate for a construction worker, and I sat Malik down. I made sure my heavy canvas coat was still wrapped tight around his small frame. I smoothed his hair back from his forehead. His skin was still clammy and cold. I turned to face my son and his wife. I let the silence stretch. I let it fill the room until it was heavy and suffocating. I wanted their guests to soak in the image. The shivering, blue-lipped child. The grand feast. The parents who had chosen a rug over a life. Finally, I looked directly at Darius. I waited until he was forced to look up until his weak, evasive eyes met mine. Then I looked at Vanessa. "Why was my grandson outside?" I asked. I did not shout. I did not have to. My voice was a low rumble like distant thunder. It carried 40 years of hard labor and harder lessons. Vanessa let out a nervous little laugh. "Oh, Isaiah, do not be dramatic. He was just having a time out. He spilled grape juice all over the new white runner in the hallway, the one I had shipped from overseas. We told him to go cool off for 5 minutes. He must have just stayed out there to be stubborn. You know how boys are." She looked around at her guests for validation, expecting them to nod and agree about the difficulties of raising children, but nobody moved. Nobody smiled. They looked from the terrified boy shaking in my coat to the woman sipping her wine, and the atmosphere in the room curdled. "Cool off," I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "It is 15 degrees outside, Vanessa. He is wearing a t-shirt. He is hypothermic." She waved her hand dismissively, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Oh, please. He's fine. He is a tough kid. We are teaching him responsibility." Actions have consequences, Isaiah. We cannot just let him ruin our investments. That rug was an investment. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the hollowness behind her eyes. I saw a woman who knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. Then I looked at Darius. And you, I said to my son, you sat here eating turkey while your son froze on the concrete. Darius opened his mouth. Dad, come on. He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. She is right about the discipline. We were going to let him in. We just lost track of time. We were entertaining, lost track of time. The phrase hung in the air. It was the final straw. My wife's voice echoed in my head. A spine made of cotton. He was not protecting his family. He was protecting his lifestyle. He was sacrificing his son on the altar of his wife's vanity. I stood up. The chair fell backward with a loud clatter, but I did not look at it. I placed my hands flat on their beautiful table, leaning over the centerpiece of imported orchids. I looked at their friends, these strangers who were witnessing the rot at the heart of this house. Get out, I said. The guests blinked. One of the men, a guy with a red tie, started to puff up his chest. Excuse me, he said. Who do you think you are coming in here and ordering us around? This is Darius and Vanessa's home, and we are guests. I turned my gaze on him. It was the look I used on job sites when a subcontractor tried to cut corners on a load-bearing wall. It was a look that promised violence if respect was not given. I slowly reached into my back pocket and pulled out a checkbook. The same checkbook that had paid for the down payment on this house. The same checkbook that paid the mortgage every month when Darius's commission checks were too thin. I turned back to Vanessa and Darius. The color drained from Vanessa's face. She knew. She knew exactly who held the keys to her kingdom. I leaned in close, my voice dropping to a terrifying whisper that cut through the room like a razor. This is still my house, I said. Every brick, every beam, every bite of food on this table. I looked at the guests again. The party is over, I said. Go. Now. The silence that followed was absolute. It crushed the festive spirit of the room, turning the air thick and hard to breathe. The man in the red tie looked at Darius, waiting for the host to stand up to defend his home, to throw out the intruder. But Darius just slumped in his chair, a defeated man who knew he had no power. One by one, the guests stood up. There were mumbled apologies and awkward glances. They grabbed their coats and purses, moving with a sudden, desperate urgency. They fled the dining room, escaping the house as if it were on fire. They did not want to be witnesses to what was coming next. They wanted to get back to their comfortable lives where ugly truths were kept hidden behind closed doors. Vanessa tried to stop them, her voice rising in panic. No, wait. Do not go. The dessert is coming. It is just a misunderstanding. Please stay. But the front door opened and closed until the rhythm of their departure ended. The heavy oak door clicked shut one last time, sealing us in. The audience was gone. The performance was over. It was just the four of us left in the wreckage of their perfect Thanksgiving. I turned my back on the wreckage of the dinner party and focused entirely on the small, trembling boy in my arms. The silence in the house was thick enough to choke on, but I ignored it. Come on, Malik. I whispered, my voice soft and low. Let us get you warm. I walked past Darius and Vanessa, who stood like statues of shame in their dining room, and carried my grandson into the kitchen. It was a space that belonged in a magazine, all white marble countertops, and gleaming stainless steel appliances that looked like they had never been touched. It was a room designed for catering crews and photo shoots, not for family breakfasts or midnight snacks. I sat Malik on a bar stool and ran the water in the sink until it was warm. I found a clean dish towel and gently began to wash the dirt and frozen tears from his face. The warmth seemed to shock him at first, but then he leaned into my hand, closing his eyes. I opened their refrigerator, which was bigger than my first apartment. It was filled with expensive cheeses, sparkling waters, and organic produce that would likely rot before it was eaten. I found a carton of chicken broth, poured it into a saucepan, and set it on the stove. The hiss of the gas flame was the only sound in the room until the clicking of high heels shattered the quiet. Vanessa marched into the kitchen, her face flushed with a mixture of wine and rage. "Dad, you are being incredibly dramatic," she snapped. She tried to keep her voice steady, but it was thin and sharp like broken glass. It was a punishment, Isaiah. Children need discipline. We were teaching him to be responsible for his actions. Do you have any idea how much that rug cost? It was hand-woven in Morocco. I did not look at her. I kept stirring the broth, the metal spoon making a slow, rhythmic clinking against the pot. He has to learn that carelessness has a price. She continued, her voice rising an octave. And you just marched in here and humiliated us. That was Robert Davis, Isaiah. He is a senior partner at Darius's firm. Do you know how hard we have worked to get him to this house? You just destroyed months of networking in 5 minutes. I finally stopped stirring. I turned slowly and looked at her. I let my eyes travel over her perfectly styled hair, her expensive jewelry, and finally her eyes. I saw her clearly for the first time. She was not a mother. She was a curator. She was managing a museum of a life, and Malik was just an exhibit that had gathered dust. Darius drifted into the room behind her, a ghost in his own home. He looked at the floor, at the ceiling, anywhere but at me. "Dad, come on," he pleaded weakly. "She's right. It was just a lesson. We were going to let him in. We just got distracted by the guests." I looked at my son. I looked for the boy I had raised, the boy who used to cry when he found a hurt bird in the yard. I could not find him. He had been buried under layers of debt and the desperate need to please a woman who could not be pleased. Eleanor was right. His spine had turned to cotton. I poured the broth into a mug and turned back to Malik, ignoring them both completely. I wrapped a heavy wool throw blanket around his shoulders and helped him hold the cup. His hands were still shaking too much to manage it alone. "I'm staying," I said. It was not a question. Vanessa gasped. "You cannot just invite yourself to stay," she said. "We have plans tomorrow. This is not a good time." I looked at her over the rim of Malik's mug. "I paid for this roof, Vanessa," I said calmly. "I paid for the bed you sleep in. I'm staying." She opened her mouth to argue, but something in my face stopped her. She spun on her heel and stormed out of the room. Darius lingered for a moment, looking like he wanted to say something, maybe an apology, maybe an excuse, but he just sighed and followed his wife. I took Malik to the guest room on the first floor. It was a cold, sterile space that felt more like a hotel room than part of a home. The sheets were stiff and smelled of chemicals. The art on the walls was generic, abstract shapes that meant nothing. I tucked him in and sat in the chair by the bed until his breathing evened out. But sleep was impossible for me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his blue lips. After an hour of staring at the ceiling, I got up and walked quietly down the hall to his bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. His room was just as lifeless as the rest of the house. Expensive toys sat on high shelves in their original packaging, trophies of his parents' spending rather than tools for a child's imagination. Malik was awake. He was sitting up in bed, hugging his knees, staring at the moonlight filtering through the window. He did not look surprised to see me. "Hey, champ," I whispered, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Couldn't sleep?" He shook his head. He shook. We sat in silence for a long time. A man learns patience when he works with wood, waiting for the grain to reveal itself. I waited for Malik to speak. "It is not the first time," he said softly. My heart felt like a lead weight in my chest. What isn't, son?" I asked. "Getting locked out," he said, not looking at me. "Last month I got mud on Mom's new white sneakers, the ones that she wears for tennis. She made me stand on the patio in the rain to wash them off. She watched me from the kitchen window to make sure I did not miss a spot." He took a shaky breath. "When I accidentally broke a glass vase, Darius took my video game away. Mom said it was because I didn't respect their things. They're always talking about things, Grandpa. The price of things. The value of things." He finally looked at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears in the dark room. Sometimes he whispered, his voice so small it broke my heart. "Sometimes they just forget I am here." They go out to dinner with their friends, and the babysitter does not show up. I just watch TV until they come home. They bring me leftovers sometimes. Each word was a blow, a physical impact against my soul, a confirmation of the ugly truth I had seen festering just beneath the surface. My promise to Eleanor, the one I made at her bedside as she took her last breath, came rushing back to me. Protect them, Isaiah. Protect our boy and his boy. I had been watching from a distance, sending checks thinking that financial support was enough. I had been a fool. I had been funding their neglect. The anger from earlier in the evening had cooled, settling into something harder, something colder, and more permanent. It was resolve. I was not just going to save my grandson from the cold for one night. I was going to save him from his parents. I kissed Malik on the forehead and told him to try to sleep. I walked back to the cold guest room, but I did not lay down. I sat by the window and watched the sun slowly rise over the perfectly manicured neighborhood. I watched the light hit the frost on the grass. By the time the first rays of dawn touched the driveway, I had a plan. I was going to burn their world down, and I was going to use their own greed as the match. The next morning, the tension in the house was so thick, you could have cut it with a knife. I came downstairs to find Darius and Vanessa in the kitchen, nursing cups of coffee like they were sacred relics. They looked like they had not slept a wink. Good. They were expecting a confrontation, a lecture, a shouting match where they could twist my words and play the victims. I was not going to give them the satisfaction. I walked to the coffee maker, poured myself a cup, and took a slow sip, letting the silence hang in the air. Then I turned to them. I am taking Malik back to my place for a few days, I said. My voice was calm and level. It was the voice I used on a work site when I was giving an order that was not up for debate. Vanessa's coffee cup slammed down on the marble countertop with a sharp crack. Excuse me, she hissed, her voice a low, dangerous sound. What did you just say? You heard me, I replied, holding her gaze. Her face flushed with a sudden, blotchy red. You have no right, she spat. Standing up so fast, her chair scraped loudly against the floor. He is my son. This is my home. You do not get to just walk in here and dictate what happens in our lives. This is a private family matter, and you are interfering, Isaiah. She used my first name, a clear sign of disrespect, a line she had never crossed before. You are trying to undermine me as a mother, she shouted. You think you know better. After one day, my internal monologue was cold and clear. I saw that her outrage had absolutely nothing to do with motherhood or what was best for Malik. It was about power. I had challenged her authority in her own castle, and she could not stand it. I was a stain on her perfect picture, and she was desperate to scrub me out. Darius jumped up, placing himself physically between us, his hands raised in a useless gesture of surrender. Okay, everybody just calm down, he said, his voice pleading. Dad, we know we were wrong yesterday, we admit it. It was a mistake, but this is too much. You cannot just take him. I looked at my son, at this man who was so terrified of conflict, he would rather live in a gilded cage than stand up for his own child. Eleanor's words echoed in my head, a sad prophecy fulfilled. Jessica, honey, he said, turning to his wife. He is just worried. Let us all just talk this out like adults. She shot him a look of pure venom. There is nothing to talk about, Darius. Your father is trying to kidnap our son. Her accusation was so absurd, so theatrical, that I almost laughed. Instead, I took another slow sip of my coffee. I let their panic and chaos wash over me, but it did not touch me. I was the eye of the storm. I placed my cup deliberately in the sink. I looked past my frantic son, past my furious daughter-in-law, and I delivered the final verdict. I'm not asking for your permission, I said, my voice cutting through their noise like a shard of glass. I am informing you of my decision. And with that, I turned my back on them and walked out of the kitchen. The move was a dismissal, a clear statement that their arguments were irrelevant. I walked up the stairs, my steps heavy, and even on the plush carpet. Each step was a measured beat in the new rhythm of our lives. I went into Malik's room and found a small duffel bag in his closet. I packed it with a calm efficiency that I knew was more infuriating to them than any shout could ever be. A few pairs of jeans, some sweaters, his toothbrush, the book I saw on his nightstand. Simple things, necessary things. Malik stood in the doorway watching me. He did not say a word. When I was done, I zipped the bag and held out my hand. He took it without hesitation. That simple act of trust was all the confirmation I needed. We walked down the stairs together. They were waiting in the foyer, two cornered animals, their faces a mixture of fury and helplessness. Vanessa's hands were clenched into fists at her sides. Darius just looked defeated. I did not say goodbye. I simply walked toward the door, holding my grandson's hand. I led him out into the cold morning air, into the safety of my old truck. As I pulled away from the curb, I saw them in the rearview mirror. Two small figures standing in the doorway of a big, empty house. They had expected a shouting match they could manipulate. They got a tactical extraction they were powerless to stop. Once we were on the highway with the sterile suburban landscape shrinking in the distance, I picked up my phone. Malik was quiet in the seat beside me, just watching the world go by. The fear and tension had begun to melt from his small face, replaced by a quiet sense of relief. That was all that mattered. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice. Law offices of Regina Holt, a crisp, professional voice answered. I took a deep breath, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Regina, I said, my voice steady and hard as iron. It is Isaiah Turner. Isaiah. Something has happened. No, everyone is physically safe for now, but I need to see you today if you can. It is time. It is time to open the Eleanor file. My house in the historic West End of Atlanta was a world away from the sterile stucco palace we had just left. It was a solid brick bungalow built in the 1920s, a place with deep porches and creaky heart pine floors that groaned with the weight of memories. It smelled of lemon oil, old books, and the lingering scent of the pipe tobacco I smoked on the back deck. It was not impressive to people like Vanessa, but it was a home. As soon as we walked through the front door, I saw the tension leave Malik's shoulders. He dropped his bag in the hallway and ran to the old worn leather armchair in the living room, the one Eleanor used to read to him in. He curled up in it like a cat finding a sunbeam. I went to the kitchen and made him a grilled cheese sandwich, the simple comfort food his parents probably considered too pedestrian for their diet. While he ate, I stepped onto the back porch and made the second call to Regina Holt. Do it, I said. Regina did not need me to elaborate. She knew the plan. She knew the financial spiderweb that held Darius and Vanessa's life together. Are you sure, Isaiah? She asked, her voice professional, but laced with a hint of concern. This is the nuclear option. Once we freeze the discretionary distributions, they're going to feel it immediately. Their liquidity is entirely dependent on that monthly transfer. I looked through the kitchen window at my grandson, who was finally eating with a real appetite. I am sure, I said. Cut it off, all of it. The monthly stipend, the credit card authorization, the access to the emergency fund. I want the well to run dry today. Consider it done, she said. I hung up the phone and felt a grim satisfaction. For years, I had been the silent engine behind their luxury. Darius had a job, a decent one, at a mid-sized architectural firm, but his salary barely covered the mortgage on that monstrosity of a house and the basic utilities. Everything else, the luxury cars, the country club, dues, the designer clothes, the organic catering, came from the Turner Family Trust. It was money I'd accumulated over a lifetime of building commercial real estate money I had set aside to ensure my family would always be secure. But they had treated it like a bottomless pit. They had confused my generosity with their entitlement. The impact was immediate. I imagined the scene playing out across town as the invisible noose tightened around their necks. It likely started small. Perhaps Vanessa stopped for her $12 latte and the card was declined. Or maybe Darius tried to pay for a client lunch and the waiter had to return with that polite, apologetic whisper that signals social death. By the afternoon, the silence of my phone was broken. It started with a text from Darius. Dad, is something wrong with the bank. My card is not working. I ignored it. Then came a call. Then another text. Dad, seriously. I'm at the gas station. The card was declined. Call me back. By evening, the panic had set in. The phone rang incessantly. I turned the ringer off and placed it face down on the kitchen table. I sat there with Malik helping him with a puzzle of the solar system. We fit the pieces together slowly, finding order in the chaos while his parents' world began to fall apart. Later that night, after I'd tucked Malik into the bed in the spare room, the room that still had his father's old baseball trophies on the shelf, I sat down to listen to the voicemails. There were 12 of them. The first few were confused. Darius sounding perplexed, asking if I had forgotten to authorize the transfer. Then they turned angry. Vanessa's voice shrill and demanding, wanting to know why I was punishing them, why I was being so petty. Isaiah, this is ridiculous. Her voice snapped from the speaker. You cannot just cut us off. We have bills. The lease on the Lexus is due. You are being childish. I listened to every single message. I listened for one specific thing. I waited to hear my son ask about his boy. I waited to hear a mother ask if her child was eating, if he was scared if he missed his own bed. I listened to 12 messages. I heard about the Lexus. I heard about the country club dues. I heard about the embarrassment of a declined card. I heard anger. I heard fear about their social standing, but in 12 frantic messages, I did not hear the name Malik spoken once. They were not calling a father to ask about their son. They were calling a bank manager to complain about a glitch in the system. I sat alone in my dark kitchen, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. A heavy sadness settled over me, a grief for the son I had lost to greed and weakness. Eleanor had warned me. She had told me that money without character was a curse. I had not wanted to believe her, but the evidence was right there in the silence between their angry words. They did not miss their child. They missed their money. I picked up the phone and dialed Regina's number again. It was late, but I knew she would be up. She answered on the first ring. They called. I said, my voice flat and tired. I assumed they would, she replied. Did they ask about the boy? No, I said. They asked about the Lexus. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A moment of shared understanding between two old friends who knew that the truth is often the hardest thing to bear. Then we have everything we need to proceed, she said softly. I will prepare the paperwork for the investigation. We are going to need proof, Isaiah. Real proof. We need to show the court that this is not just about money, but about neglect. I know, I said. I will get it. I hung up the phone. The squeeze was on. They were desperate now, and desperate people make mistakes. They would be so focused on the money, so consumed by their own financial panic, that they would not see the trap closing around them until it was too late. I went to check on Malik one last time. He was sleeping soundly, his thumb near his mouth, safe and warm, in a house built on love. I would burn their whole world to the ground to keep him that way. Regina Holt's law office was a fortress of glass and steel, perched on the top floor of a skyscraper in downtown Atlanta. It was a world away from my dusty workshop, or the silent tension of my kitchen. The air up here was thin and smelled of expensive leather, and the kind of filtered climate control that money buys. It was a place of quiet power where fortunes were protected, and lives were rearranged with the stroke of a pen. I sat in a high-backed chair that looked out over the sprawling city. The cars below looked like toys moving in silent lines along the highway. It gave you a sense of detachment, a feeling that you were a god, looking down on the petty struggles of men. I did not feel like a god. I felt like a man who was about to declare war on his own blood. Regina walked in a moment later. She was a tall woman with skin the color of deep mahogany and eyes that missed nothing. She wore her graying hair in elegant braids, and her suit was sharp enough to cut you. We had known each other for 20 years. She had handled my business contracts, my property deeds, and finally the estate planning when Eleanor got sick. She was not just a lawyer. She was a guardian. She sat behind her massive desk, which was completely bare except for a single thick burgundy binder. She placed her hands on it and looked at me. You look tired, Isaiah, she said, her voice a smooth professional alto that could soothe a client or terrify a witness. I am tired, Regina, I admitted. I am tired of watching my family rot from the inside out. She nodded slowly. You made the call to cut the funds. That was a bold move. It was the only move left, I said. They do not hear words anymore. They only hear money. She opened the binder. The spine cracked slightly, a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet room. This was the Rose file, or rather the Eleanor file, as I called it in my head. It was the master plan my wife had insisted on creating 6 months before she passed. I want to go over the structure again, Regina said. I want to make sure you understand the weapon Eleanor left you, because that is what this is, Isaiah. It is not just a trust, it is a weapon. She turned the binder around so I could see the diagram on the first page. Most people think a trust is just a bucket of money you hand over when you die, she explained. But Eleanor was smarter than that. She knew that unearned wealth can be a poison. So she created the Turner Family Trust as a discretionary structure. She tapped the box at the top of the page. This is the trust, she said. It owns everything. It owns the house Darius and Vanessa live in. It owns the investment portfolio. It owns the savings. You do not own these things personally anymore, and neither does Darius. The trust owns them. She moved her finger down to the next box. This is the trustee, she continued. That is you. You are the manager. You are the gatekeeper. You have sole absolute discretion over when and how money is distributed. She moved her finger to the bottom box. And this is the beneficiary. That is Darius. And this is the critical part. His status is conditional. She flipped through the pages until she found a section marked with a yellow tab. She put on her reading glasses and looked at me over the rim. Do you remember the night Eleanor came in here to draft this clause, she asked. I did. I remembered it like it was yesterday. Eleanor was frail by then, the cancer eating away at her strength, but her mind was as sharp as a tack. We had argued in the car on the way over. I had told her she was being too hard on the boy. I had told her that Darius just needed time to find his footing. Eleanor had looked at me with those sad, knowing eyes. Isaiah, she had said, you see the boy he was. I see the man he is becoming. He is weak, Isaiah, and he has married a woman who feeds on that weakness. If we give him this money without strings, it will not help him. It will destroy him. Regina's voice brought me back to the present. Yes, Section 4. Subsection B, she read aloud. The legacy clause. The assets of this trust shall be used for the benefit of the primary beneficiary, Darius Turner, only upon the condition that said beneficiary demonstrates a consistent commitment to the core values of the Turner family. These values are defined as personal integrity, fiscal responsibility, and the compassionate and responsible care of any children or dependents. She paused and looked up at me. The compassionate and responsible care of children, she repeated. Eleanor was specific about that. She saw the way Vanessa looked at Malik even back then when he was just a toddler. She saw that he was an accessory to her, not a person. Regina continued reading. If the trustee determines in their sole and absolute discretion that the beneficiary has failed to uphold these values, or if the beneficiary's actions pose a threat to the physical, emotional, or financial well-being of the next generation, the trustee has the authority to suspend all distributions. Furthermore, the trustee has the power to redirect the assets to a secondary trust for the exclusive benefit of the grandchildren. I sat back in my chair, stunned by the clarity of it. Eleanor had built a trap door into the inheritance. She had handed me the power to bypass my son completely if he failed as a father. It was a terrifying amount of power, but sitting here now, after seeing Malik freezing on that patio, I realized it was the only thing that could save us. So I have the authority. I said, my voice sounding rough in the quiet room. I can cut them off permanently. I can sell the house. You have the authority. Regina confirmed, closing the binder with a heavy thud. But having the authority and using it are two different things. Darius and Vanessa will not go quietly. They will fight this. They will hire a lawyer who will claim you are a senile old man acting out of spite. They will claim you are emotionally unstable. They will try to have you removed as trustee. She leaned forward, her elbows on the desk, her face grim. We cannot just march into court with your feelings, Isaiah. We cannot just say they're bad parents. We need proof. We need a paper trail of failure so thick and so undeniable that no judge in this state would dare to rule against you. She slid a legal pad across the polished mahogany desk toward me. You have started the squeeze, she said. Now we need the evidence. I need you to become an investigator. I need you to document everything, every medical issue Malik has, every witness who has seen their neglect, every dollar they have wasted while their son went without. She picked up a silver pen and held it out to me. We are going to build a case, Isaiah. We are going to build a wall of facts around that boy that his parents cannot climb over. But I need you to be strong. This is going to get ugly. They are going to say terrible things about you. They are going to try to use Malik as a pawn. Are you ready for that? I took the pen. I felt the weight of it in my hand. I thought about the cold wind on the patio. I thought about the way Malik flinched when a door slammed. I thought about the empty look in my son's eyes. I am not doing this for me, I said, and I am not doing it for Darius. I am doing it for the future. Regina nodded, a small, tight smile appearing on her face. Good, she said. Then let us go to work. The first step is the medical record. If the boy was hypothermic, if he is malnourished, we need a doctor to say it on the record. Not you. A professional? I nodded, taking my first note on the yellow pad. Dr. Bennett. And the money, she added. I have already subpoenaed their bank records as part of the trust's annual audit. When those come in, we will have the financial proof of their priorities, but you need to find the witnesses to their life. Who sees them when the doors are closed? Who sees the truth? I wrote down another name, Mrs. Johnson, the neighbor. Regina watched me write. She looked at the file again and ran her hand over the cover. Eleanor was a wise woman, she said softly. She knew this day would come. She did not want it to come, but she prepared for it. She gave you the hammer. Isaiah, now you have to be the one to swing it. I looked out the window at the city one last time. The cars were still moving in their silent lines, oblivious to the war that was being planned in the sky above them. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. I was a builder. I knew how to construct things. I knew how to lay a foundation. And now I knew how to demolish a structure that was too rotten to save. The days that followed my meeting with Regina were a blur of calculated, quiet moves. I was no longer just a grandfather acting on instinct to save a freezing child. I was an agent of my wife's final wishes. I was a strategist guided by Regina Holt's sharp legal mind. My grief and anger were channeled into a cold, methodical purpose. Each step was a piece of a puzzle, and when assembled, it would create a picture of neglect and greed so clear that no one could deny it. My first move was the doctor's visit. I told Malik we were going for a routine checkup. I told him it was something his grandmother Eleanor always insisted on at the start of winter to make sure we were ready for the cold season. He accepted it without question, trusting me in a way that made my chest ache. I took him to see Dr. Clarence Bennett. Clarence was a kind, gray-haired man who had been my family's doctor for 30 years. He had treated my scraped knees as a young man. He had delivered Darius. And he had held my hand when Eleanor took her last breath. I trusted him with my life, and now I was trusting him with Malik's. In the quiet of the examination room, I watched as Dr. Bennett went through the motions. His gentle demeanor put Malik at ease. He listened to his heart. He checked his ears. He tapped his knees. But I could see a subtle shift in Clarence's expression as he worked. It was a professional concern that deepened with each new observation. After he had finished with Malik, he sent him to the waiting room with a lollipop and a comic book. He closed the door and looked at me over his glasses. The air in the room felt heavy. He began, his voice low and serious. He is a sweet kid, but I am concerned. He is significantly underweight for his age and height. His reflexes are a little sluggish, which can be a sign of poor nutrition. But it is more than that. He picked up a clipboard and showed me the results of a blood test he had run quickly in the lab. His cortisol levels are abnormally high. For a boy his age, he explained. Cortisol is the body's primary stress hormone. Levels like this are usually found in children experiencing significant prolonged anxiety or emotional distress. It is the body's reaction to being in a constant state of fight or flight. He looked me in the eye. Has anything been going on at home, he asked. I told him. I told him a sanitized version of the story, but I told him enough. I told him about the cold patio. I told him about the isolation. Clarence's face hardened. He took out a pen and began writing furiously. He wrote his findings down on a sheet of paper. It was a detailed clinical account of a child living under a cloud of stress. He stamped it with his official seal, signed it, and handed it to me. "Whatever you are doing, Isaiah," he said at meeting my eyes, "you are doing the right thing. This boy is starving, not just for food, but for safety." I left his office with a piece of paper that felt as heavy as a stone tablet. It was the first piece of proof. My next move was to go back to the scene of the crime. I drove to Darius's neighborhood in the middle of the day when I knew he and Vanessa would be at work. I parked my truck down the street and walked to the house next door. Mrs. Hattie Mae Johnson was an older woman who spent her days tending to her winter roses. She was the kind of neighbor who saw everything but said nothing. I had met her a few times at neighborhood cookouts back when things were better. I started by asking about her flowers, and for a few minutes we just talked like old neighbors catching up. Then I gently guided the conversation. "I've had Malik with me for a few days," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just giving Darius and Vanessa a little break. The boy has a lot of energy." Mrs. Johnson stopped snipping a dead rosebud. She froze. She looked at me, her eyes full of a sad, knowing look. "He is a sweet boy," she said quietly. "A very quiet boy. I see him in the yard all the time by himself." She hesitated. She looked at the looming stucco mansion next door, as if it were a monster that might hear her. Then she seemed to make a decision. "You know, I almost called someone a few weeks ago," she confessed, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It was getting dark, and so cold. He was just sitting on the back steps in a sweatshirt. For hours, Isaiah. I kept watching from my kitchen window, waiting for them to call him in. But they never did. The lights were on inside. I could see them walking around. But they just left him there." She wiped her hands on her apron, her face twisted with guilt. "I felt so awful," she said. "But you know you do not want to get involved in other people's business. You do not want to start trouble." Her words were another piece of the puzzle, a third-party account that painted the same bleak picture as the medical report. It was not just a one-time mistake. It was a pattern. I asked her if she would be willing to write that down. She hesitated for a moment, afraid of the conflict. But then I told her what the doctor had said. I told her about the cortisol. She nodded slowly. "I will write it," she said. "For the boy." I thanked her and walked back to my truck, carrying her handwritten testimony like a weapon. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was uglier than I had imagined. The final move was Regina's. 2 days later, she emailed me a file. The subject line was simply the financials. She had used her legal authority as the trust's counsel to subpoena their financial records for the past 2 years as part of a mandatory audit. What she found was a tidal wave of reckless, selfish spending. I sat at my kitchen table late that night, the only light coming from the laptop screen. I scrolled through pages of transactions. It was a story told in dollars and cents, a story of vanity and greed. I saw the mortgage payments, which were expected, but then I saw the rest. There was a lease payment for a $70,000 Lexus SUV for Vanessa. There were charges for a country club membership that cost $25,000 a year, a club they rarely visited according to the dining charges. There were monthly shopping sprees at high-end department stores. $5,000 here, $6,000 there. Designer handbags, Italian shoes, tailored suits for Darius. And then there were the vacations. 2 trips to the Caribbean in the last year alone, first-class tickets, 5-star resorts. I looked for charges that might be for Malik. I looked for tuition to a good school. I looked for pediatric bills. I looked for toy stores or bookstores. I found almost nothing. They were living like royalty on my money, while my grandson wore clothes that were too small and waited for leftovers. They were hemorrhaging cash to keep up an image to impress people they did not even like. Regina had highlighted a section at the bottom. It was a summary of their debts. Despite the thousands of dollars I sent them every month, they were $60,000 in credit card debt. They were drowning. The trust was not a safety net for them. It was a lifeline that was barely keeping their heads above water. I closed the laptop. My eyes burned. I felt a profound sense of nausea. I sat there in the silence of my modest home, the house I had paid for with sweat and blood, and I laid everything out before me. To my left was the clinical, damning medical report from Dr. Bennett. In the center were my handwritten notes from the conversation with Mrs. Johnson. To my right was the list of extravagant expenses that proved they loved themselves far more than they loved their son. The silent moves were complete. The investigation was over. I had built the wall Regina asked for. I had the bricks and the mortar. The foundation of their lives was now exposed, and I had the proof to bring the whole rotten structure crashing down. I felt no joy. I felt no triumph. I only felt the heavy, solemn weight of a promise that was about to be kept. I was going to destroy my son's life to save my grandson's future. And I was ready to do it. For 3 days, I let them stew in their own panic. I did not answer the phone. I did not reply to the texts that shifted from confusion to begging to rage. I let the silence stretch until it was tight enough to snap. I imagined them in that big cold house watching the lights on their dashboard blink warnings and listening to the polite but firm voices of bank tellers explaining that their accounts were frozen. I was not just being cruel. I was waiting for the desperation to peak. I needed them to be so frantic that they forgot their scripts. I needed them to be raw. On Saturday morning, the phone rang again. I looked at the caller ID. It was Darius. I was sitting at the kitchen table drinking my coffee. Malik was in the living room watching cartoons, the sound of old Looney Tunes filling the house with a cheerful noise that felt miles away from the war I was fighting. Malik, I called out gently, why don't you go out to the backyard for a bit? I think I saw a cardinal near the feeder. He jumped up happy to have a mission and ran out the back door. I waited until I saw him through the window, safely occupied with the bird feeder, before I turned back to the phone. It was still ringing, a shrill, demanding sound. I pulled out the small digital recorder Regina had given me. She told me not to trust a phone app. She wanted a separate physical tape, something that could be slapped on a table in a courtroom as undeniable physical evidence. I pressed the red record button and watched the little light blink to life. Then I answered the phone. I put it on speaker and set it down on the wood table next to the recorder. Hello? I said. Dad, finally. Darius's voice was tight with a mixture of anger and anxiety. It was high-pitched and breathless like he had been running. I've been calling you for 3 days, he said. What's going on? The bank says there's a hold on the transfer. We have checks bouncing, Dad. Actual checks are bouncing. It is embarrassing. I could hear the echo on his end. The sound of a large, empty room with too much tile and not enough furniture. And I could hear something else. A faint, sharp whisper in the background. A woman's voice hissing instructions. Vanessa was there coaching him like a boxer in the corner of a ring. There's a review on the account, I said calmly. My voice was slow, deliberate. I was the anchor. He was the boat in the storm. What does that mean, a review, he demanded. Since when? You need to authorize it now. The mortgage is due on Tuesday. If we miss the payment, there is a penalty fee. It messes up our credit score. I leaned in closer to the phone. Darius, I said, ignoring his question about the money. How are things there? There was a pause. He was thrown off by the question. He expected a fight about finances, not a casual inquiry about his life. What do you mean? How are things, he stammered. Things are terrible. We are broke. We cannot buy groceries. I had to ask a coworker to spot me for lunch yesterday. Do you know how humiliating that is? In the background, Vanessa's whisper became a furious squawk. Tell him about the interest rate, Darius. Tell him. I closed my eyes. My son was 40 years old and he was complaining about lunch money while his wife pulled his strings. Is that all you're worried about? I asked softly. Lunch, money, and credit scores. Darius let out a frustrated sigh. Dad, stop playing games, he said, his voice gaining a false bravado. This isn't a game. This is our livelihood. You are jeopardizing our financial stability. I waited a beat. I needed to pivot. I needed to offer him the rope to hang himself. How is the house? I asked. It is a big place for 2 people. Vanessa must have heard me because she snapped something loud enough for the microphone to catch. The asset, Darius. Focus on the asset. The house is fine, Dad. But that is the point. Darius said, his voice taking on a whiny lecturing tone. It is an investment. You do not understand modern finance. This house is our main asset. It is our equity. We have a strategy. We are building wealth here. I looked at the recorder. The little red light was blinking steady and true, capturing every word. I see, I said. You are building wealth. And what about your family, Darius? He scoffed. We are a family, Dad. That is what I'm trying to tell you. We are trying to build a future for this family, but you are holding us back with this petty control freak nonsense. I took a deep breath. This was the moment. I had to ask the question that would seal his fate. I'm not talking about you and Vanessa, I said, my voice hard as flint. I am talking about Malik. There was dead silence on the other end of the line. The name of his son hung in the air like a ghost. I have asked you 3 times about money, I continued. I have asked you about the house. You have talked about credit scores and lunch and equity, but in 5 minutes you have not asked a single question about your son. The silence stretched. I could hear Darius breathing. I could hear him shifting his weight. Is he okay? I asked, my voice rising just a fraction. Is he eating? Is he sleeping? Do you even know what size shoe he wears, Darius? Because the ones he had on were 2 sizes too small. There was a fumble on the other end. Then Darius spoke, but his voice was different. It was defensive. Angry. Of course he is okay, Darius snapped. He is with you, isn't he? You are always trying to make us look bad. You are judging us because we do not parent exactly like you and Mom did. We are not talking about parenting styles, I said. We are talking about neglect. In the background, Vanessa lost it. I heard her heels clicking on the floor as she grabbed the phone. Give me that, she shouted. Then her voice was right there in the room with me, sharp and venomous. Listen to me, Isaiah, she hissed. You are trying to sabotage us. You are jealous because we have more than you ever did. You are trying to use Malik as a pawn to control us. Well, it is not going to work. I stayed silent. I let her rage fill the empty space. We have a lifestyle to maintain, she screamed. We have a position in this community. That house is our future. It is the only thing that matters right now because without that asset, we are nothing. Do you hear me? We have to protect the asset. There it was. The confession. She did not say we have to protect our son. She said we have to protect the asset. Darius's voice came back on the line, weaker this time, but agreeing with her. She is right, Dad, he said. You need to release the funds. The house is our equity. You are messing with our future. I felt a cold sadness wash over me. It was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. My son was gone. The boy I had raised had been fully consumed by this hollow shell of a man. He had just admitted on tape that a pile of stucco and wood meant more to him than his own flesh and blood. Thank you, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. Thank you for what Darius asked, confused by my tone. Thank you for clarifying your position, I said. I have everything I need now. Wait, Dad, what does that mean? He asked, panic creeping back into his voice. When are you sending the money? I looked out the window. Malik was running across the grass, chasing a squirrel, his laughter faint through the glass. I have to go, Darius, I said. Dad, do not hang up on me, he shouted. Do not you dare hang up. I reached out and pressed the end call button. The line went dead. The kitchen was quiet again. I picked up the recorder and pressed stop. The little red light faded to black. It was done. I had the weapon. I had the proof. I sat there for a long time, staring at the device. It was a tiny thing, a piece of plastic and wire, but it held the power to destroy a family, or to save one. I stood up and walked to the computer. My movements were slow and heavy. I plugged the recorder in and waited for the file to appear. I attached it to an email addressed to Regina Holt. The subject line was 2 words: the proof. I hit send and watched the progress bar slide across the screen. When it disappeared, I felt a strange sense of finality. The bridge was burned. There was no going back now. I walked to the back door and opened it. The cold air hit my face, bracing in clean. "Malik," I called out. He stopped running and looked at me, his face flushed with the cold, his eyes bright. "Hey, champ," I said. "How about we go get some ice cream?" He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Even in winter?" he asked. "Especially in winter," I said. He ran to me and I caught him in my arms. I held him tight, knowing that I had just done the hardest thing a father can do. I had betrayed my son to save his, but looking at Malik's face, I knew I would do it again in a heartbeat. The letter arrived at their doorstep on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a private courier. It was a single sheet of thick cream paper embossed with the gold seal of Regina Holt's law firm. It was a masterpiece of legal neutrality. It did not threaten and it did not accuse. It simply invited Darius and Vanessa Turner to a mandatory family meeting to discuss the future administration and long-term planning of the Turner Family Trust. It was the perfect bait. It was an official-sounding invitation that spoke their language. It used words like administration and planning, words that whispered of money and control. I was sitting in Regina's office when she told me they had received it. She had a small, dry smile on her face as she leaned back in her leather chair. "They responded within the hour, Isaiah," she said. "Vanessa called me herself." She sounded relieved. She said she and Darius were delighted to finally put this recent misunderstanding behind them and move forward with the formalities. I could picture it perfectly. I could see Vanessa standing in her marble foyer, holding that heavy envelope, her panic instantly transforming into smug triumph. She would have seen it as a white flag. She would have interpreted the formal invitation as a sign of my surrender. In her mind, the freeze on their accounts had been a tantrum, a momentary lapse in judgment by a senile old man who had finally come to his senses. She believed she had won the war of attrition. She believed that I had realized I could not live without them, or perhaps that I was simply too weak to fight her. Regina looked at her notes. She even asked if she should bring her financial advisor. Regina added, she wanted to know if we would be discussing the tax implications of the impending asset transfer. I had to close my eyes against the wave of sadness that washed over me. The sheer blinding arrogance of it was breathtaking. They had not learned a single thing in the week of silence. They had felt no remorse. They had no concern for their son, who was currently sitting in my living room learning how to build a birdhouse. They saw this meeting as their coronation. They thought they were coming to watch the old king abdicate and hand over the keys to the kingdom, so they agreed to the time I asked, my voice steady. "Wednesday at 10 in the morning, Regina confirmed. Sim, they will be there." "Good," I said. "So will I." Wednesday morning broke cold and gray. The sky was the color of slate, matching the heavy feeling in my gut. I dressed carefully. I did not wear a suit. I was not a businessman. I wore my best Sunday clothes. A crisp button-down shirt, a dark cardigan, and slacks. I wanted to look like exactly who I was. A father. A grandfather. A man who valued substance over style. I drove to the city with a sense of grim determination. I parked my truck in the underground garage and took the elevator up to the 40th floor. The silence in the lift was heavy. I was ascending to the battlefield. I sat in the conference room with Regina. It was a large, imposing space with a long mahogany table that shone like a mirror. The view of the city was spectacular, but I kept my back to it. I faced the door. At 10 o'clock exactly, the heavy glass door swung open. They walked in exactly as I had pictured they would. Vanessa led the way. She was dressed for victory in a sharp, cream-colored power suit that probably cost more than my first car. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was flawless. Her smile was bright, confident, and utterly false. She looked like a predator who had finally cornered her prey. She walked with a strut, the click of her heels on the floor, echoing like gunshots. Darius trailed a step behind her. He was a nervous shadow in her orbit, clutching a leather briefcase as if it were a shield. He wore a suit that was too tight, a trendy cut that made him look like he was trying too hard to be young. They saw me and Regina sitting at the one end of the long table, and their smiles widened. They thought this was a reception. "Good morning," Vanessa chirped, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness. She walked over and placed her expensive handbag on the table with a proprietary air. She looked around the room, nodding approvingly at the expensive art on the walls. "We are so happy to be here," she said, pulling out a chair. "We are very eager to finalize the plan and move forward. It has been such a stressful week, but we are glad you finally decided to be sensible, Isaiah." She sat down, smoothing her skirt. Darius sat next to her, offering a weak, tentative smile in my direction. "Hey, Dad," he said. "Good to see you." I looked at my son. I looked at the man who had complained about lunch money while his child froze. I looked at him, and I felt nothing but a deep, hollow pity. Regina did not smile. She did not offer them coffee. She did not make small talk. She sat with her hands folded on top of the burgundy binder. "Good morning," she said, her voice cool and formal. "Please have a seat. Thank you for coming." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vanessa's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She sensed the shift. She realized that there were no pastries on the table, no water pitchers, no friendly welcome. "This meeting," Regina began, her words precise and deliberate, "has been called to review the execution and current standing of the Turner Family Trust, specifically in relation to the stipulations outlined within the document." Vanessa shifted in her chair. The legal jargon was not the friendly chat she had anticipated. "As you know," Regina continued, "Darius is the designated beneficiary of the trust. However, that status is conditional." She opened the binder. The sound of the metal rings clicking open was loud in the silent room. She turned a page and slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany table toward them. "I would like to draw your attention to Section 4, subsection B," she said. "The Family Legacy Clause." Vanessa looked at the paper, then at Regina, then at me. The arrogance was still there, but a crack had appeared in the porcelain mask. She picked up the paper with 2 fingers, as if it were something dirty. "What is this?" she asked with a nervous laugh. "We are here to talk about the transfer." "Read it," I said. It was the first time I had spoken. My voice was low and rough like gravel. Vanessa stopped. She looked at me, and for the first time since she walked in, she saw the fire in my eyes. She looked down at the paper and began to read. "That is all very nice," Vanessa said, giving a little laugh that sounded brittle in the quiet room. She waved a hand dismissively at the paper. "Very sentimental. Eleanor was always the romantic, wasn't she, Isaiah? But really, what does any of that have to do with the practical matter of transferring the estate's assets?" "It has everything to do with it," Regina said, her voice turning to ice. "As trustee, Mr. Turner has been forced to evaluate whether the conditions of this clause have been met." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle in the room. "And the evaluation has determined a failure to comply," she added. Vanessa's smile faltered. The legal jargon was not the friendly chat she had anticipated. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting between the binder and my face. Regina slid a second document across the table. It slid across the polished wood with a soft hiss that sounded like a blade being drawn. "Exhibit," Regina announced. "A sworn medical statement from Dr. Clarence Bennett." Vanessa frowned. "Dr. Bennett?" she asked. "Why were you seeing Dr. Bennett?" Regina ignored her and began to read from the document. "Patient presented with signs of hypothermia and malnutrition," she read, her voice clear and clinical. "Blood tests reveal cortisol levels consistent with chronic emotional distress and prolonged anxiety. The child is clinically underweight for his age group." Vanessa's face flushed a deep, angry red. "You took him to a doctor?" she snapped. "That is a violation of our privacy. We didn't authorize that. You have no right to take our son to a physician without our consent. As his grandfather and temporary guardian, Mr. Turner was well within his rights to seek medical care for a child he believed was in distress," Regina stated calmly. She did not look up from the binder. She simply turned the page. "Exhibit B," she said, sliding another paper forward. "A sworn affidavit from your neighbor, Mrs. Hattie Mae Johnson." Vanessa scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please," she said. "That nosy old woman. She's been trying to get into our business since we moved in. She is lonely, Isaiah. She makes things up to feel important." Regina looked at Vanessa over the rim of her glasses. Mrs. Johnson details multiple instances of observing your son Malik left unattended outside in inclement weather for extended periods of time, Regina said. She notes that on several occasions the child was locked out while the family was inside. Lies, Vanessa spat. She is senile. Is she? I asked. It was the first time I had spoken since the reading began. Vanessa looked at me, and for a second she looked afraid. Regina moved on. She was a steamroller, now flattening their excuses one by one. Exhibit C, she announced. She pushed a thick stack of papers across the table. It was the financial audit. A full financial summary of your bank and credit card accounts for the past 24 months subpoenaed by this office, Regina explained. She pointed to a highlighted column. It shows a total household income of roughly $80,000 a year from Darius's salary against expenditures of over $200,000 a year, she said. The deficit, as you know, has been covered by monthly discretionary gifts from the trust. She tapped the paper with her index finger. Gifts that paid for this, she said. She began to list the items I had seen the night before. A $70,000 Lexus SUV, she read. A country club membership with dining charges totaling $12,000. Multiple vacations to 5-star resorts. She looked up at them, her eyes hard. Meanwhile, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. There are 0 expenditures for pediatric dental care. 0 expenditures for after-school programs. And your son was found wearing sneakers 2 sizes too small, while his mother bought 3 pairs of Italian leather boots in a single month. Vanessa was speechless now. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Her mask of superiority had shattered, leaving only a raw, ugly panic. She looked at the papers spread out before her. The medical report, the witness statement, the bank records. It was a map of their selfishness. It was a documented timeline of their greed. Darius had shrunk so far down in his chair, he seemed to be trying to disappear into the floor. He was shaking. He knew what this meant. He knew that the curtain had been pulled back and there was nowhere left to hide, but they were still fighting. They were cornered animals, and cornered animals bite. This is ridiculous. Vanessa stammered, her voice rising to a shriek. You are twisting everything. We spend money on our family. That car is for the family. The club is for networking for Darius's job. You are trying to paint us as monsters because we like nice things. This is slander. I will sue you. I will sue this entire firm. Regina did not flinch. She did not even blink. She reached over and placed her hand on a small black device sitting in the center of the table. Exhibit D, she said. Regina pressed the button, and their own voices filled the room. It was a recording from Saturday morning. The audio was crystal clear. First came the sound of Darius, his voice tight and whining. This house is our main asset, Dad. It is our equity. You are jeopardizing our entire future with all this drama. The sound of his own greed echoed off the walls. It sounded small and pathetic in the cold light of the conference room. Then came the sound of Vanessa. Her voice was a sharp, furious hiss that cut through the air like a knife. We have a lifestyle to maintain. That house is our future. It is the only thing that matters right now because without that asset, we are nothing. And finally, my own voice, calm and heavy, asking the question that sealed their fate. I am not talking about you and Vanessa. I am talking about Malik. And the silence that followed, the damning, terrible silence where neither of them asked if their son was okay. Regina pressed the stop button. The silence that descended was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. They were buried under the weight of the evidence. They were buried under the truth of their own ugly souls. I watched the last bit of color drain from Vanessa's face. She looked like she had been physically struck. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sounds came out. Her expensive suit suddenly looked like a costume she was wearing in a play that had been canceled. Darius put his head in his hands, his whole body trembling. They had walked in here as conquerors expecting a check. Now they were just 2 small, pathetic people, stripped bare and exposed. Regina let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, allowing the full weight of their actions to settle upon them. Then she spoke, her voice the calm, final instrument of judgment. Based on the evidence presented here today, she said, looking directly at Darius, it is the conclusion of the trustee, Mr. Isaiah Turner, that you are in profound and irredeemable breach of the family legacy clause. She paused, letting the legal finality of her words sink in. Therefore, she continued, her voice leaving no room for appeal. I'm officially informing you that your status as beneficiary of the Turner Family Trust is hereby suspended indefinitely. Vanessa made a small choke sound, but she did not have the strength to form words. Darius did not even flinch. He was already gone. Furthermore, Regina said, delivering the final devastating blow, as per the instructions of the trust, all assets contained within it, including the property at 123 Maple Street, will be immediately liquidated and transferred into a new protected trust. She paused one last time, holding their empty gazes. The sole beneficiary of this new trust will be Malik Turner. Mr. Isaiah Turner will act as trustee and manage the funds for Malik's education and well-being until he reaches the age of 25. It was clear from their blank, shattered expressions that the words were not fully registering. They understood they had lost, but they could not comprehend the elegant, perfect justice of the mechanism. They were losing the house not to me, but to the son they had neglected. For the first time in that long, painful meeting, I spoke. I looked at my son not with anger, but with a grim sense of duty. Let me make it plain for you. I said, my voice steady and hard as stone. You have 30 days to vacate the property. The house will be sold. The proceeds will fund Malik's future. I leaned forward slightly, making sure they understood the finality of my next words. You will not receive a single dime. That was it. The final shock. The last thread of hope they might have been clinging to was severed. This was not a negotiation. It was an eviction. This was not an act of revenge. It was an act of restoration. It was the law of consequence, a lesson they had tried so desperately to teach their son, now visited upon them in its purest form. It was the promise I made to Eleanor fulfilled. The silence that followed their exit from the conference room was the beginning of a new, quiet life. I did not watch them walk to the elevator. I turned my chair to the window and looked out at the sprawling city below, finally letting out the breath I felt I had been holding for a week. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The heavy burden of their greed, the constant worry about their demands, and the fear for my grandson's safety were gone. They had been lifted off my shoulders and replaced by a clear, open road. 30 days later, the moving trucks came to the mansion on Maple Street. I was not there to see it, but Mrs. Johnson told me about it later. She said they loaded up the furniture and the clothes in silence. There were no parties. No friends came to help. It was just the hollow echo of a life built on debt being packed into cardboard boxes. Regina handled the sale. She brought in a team to clean the place, to scrub away the bad energy and the pretension. It sold in a week to a young couple with a baby on the way. I hope they fill those big cold rooms with warmth. I hope they understand that a house is just a shell until you put love inside it. The proceeds from the sale were substantial. Every last dime after the mortgage was paid off went straight into the Malik Turner Trust. It is a fortress of financial security that Darius and Vanessa can never touch. It will be there for Malik's college. It will be there for his first home. It will be there to give him the freedom to be whoever he wants to be, without the crushing weight of needing to impress anyone. 6 months have passed since that winter day. The cold gray sky has given way to the soft golden light of a Georgia spring. The azaleas in my front yard are in full bloom, exploding in shades of pink and white. My old brick bungalow feels different now. It is no longer a quiet house of memories where an old man waits out his days. It is alive. The air is filled with the smell of my cooking rich stews and cornbread and the sound of Malik's laughter. It is a sound I hear more and more each day. When he first came to me, he was silent and watchful, like a frightened animal waiting for a blow. He used to wake up screaming in the middle of the night, terrified that he had been locked out again. I would sit by his bed, rubbing his back until his breathing slowed, telling him over and over that he was safe, that he was home, that I was the oak, and I was not going anywhere. Those nightmares have faded now. The haunted, anxious look in his eyes has been replaced by the bright, curious spark of a boy who knows he is loved. He is healthy. He has gained weight, and his cheeks are round and full. He is finally free to just be a child. Right now, he is in the backyard. I can see him through the kitchen window. He is kneeling in the dirt, wearing a pair of denim overalls that are covered in mud. We are planting a vegetable garden. It was his idea. He wanted to grow things. He wanted to see something come from the earth. He looks up at me, a frustrated little frown on his face, holding a packet of tomato seeds. "Grandpa," he calls out through the screen door, "I think I put them in wrong. They are crooked." I wipe my hands on a towel and walk outside. The sun is warm on my face. I kneel beside him, my knees cracking a little with age, but I do not mind. I look at the rows he has dug. They are a little wandering, but they are deep and good. "It is okay, champ," I tell him gently. "Nature does not care about straight lines. It cares about good soil. You put them in deep, and you covered them up. That is what matters." He nods, considering this. "Will they grow?" he asks. "They will grow," I promise him. "But you have to be patient. You cannot pull them up every day to check on the roots. You have to trust them. You have to water them and give them sun and wait. That is how you build a garden. That is how you build a life, one solid day at a time." He smiles a real genuine smile that reaches his eyes and goes back to his digging. I watch him for a moment, feeling a swell of pride so strong it almost brings me to knees. I hear that Darius and Vanessa moved out west to Arizona. I do not know what they are doing, and I find I do not spend much time thinking about it. My anger has faded, leaving behind only a quiet, lingering sorrow for what could have been. I hope for their own sakes that they find their way. I hope they learn that you cannot buy happiness and you cannot finance a soul, but their journey is no longer my burden to carry. My way is here. My way is in this small sunlit garden. My way is in the simple routine of school drop-offs and homework help. Eleanor always used to say that it's easy to build a house, but it takes a lifetime to build a home. For a long time, I thought I had failed her. I thought I had failed to teach my own son that lesson, and our family cracked under the weight of his weakness. But now, looking at my grandson, I realize I have not failed. I have just been given a second chance. This was not the end of the Turner family. It was the beginning of a true legacy. A legacy is not measured in property value or bank accounts. It is not measured in the kind of car you drive or the club you belong to. It is measured in quiet moments like this. It is measured in dignity. It is measured in the safety of a child who goes to sleep, knowing he will wake up in a warm bed. It is measured in the simple, unbreakable promise of a grandfather to his grandson. I stand up and brush the dirt from my knees. Malik looks up at me, shielding his eyes from the sun. "Grandpa," he says, "when the tomatoes come, can we make sauce? Like Grandma used to?" I feel a tear track down my cheek, but it is a happy tear. "Yes, Malik," I say. "We will make the sauce. We will use her recipe." He nods satisfied and goes back to the earth. I stand there for a long time just watching him grow. I am the oak, and he is the sapling. And together we will weather any storm that comes. This story serves as a stark reminder that the most expensive things in life are often the least valuable. We spend years chasing status and accumulating assets, thinking we are building a future, but a legacy is not built with brick and mortar. It is built with the quiet, consistent moments of love we give to those who need us most. A child does not care about the price of a rug or the prestige of a country club. They only care about the safety of open arms. True wealth is not what you leave in a will, but the values you leave in a heart. Have you ever had to stand alone to do the right thing for someone you love? If you agree that a child's safety is worth more than any mansion, please hit the like button and share this story with your friends.